Welcome back to another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. No short number of headlines to get to, and namely, Iran. What comes next in Iran? How does America further their own strikes? What's Israel's involvement? How does Iran hit back? Do they start launching attacks on American boats in the region, on bases? What kind of technology do they use? What led up to all this? Who was talking to who? What was said? How long was this operation in the planning? I've got a guy with direct insight into what goes on inside of the Pentagon before a strike, whether it be small or large scale like this happening in the Middle East. He advised members of the military of what was legal, what was not legal, what information maybe needed to be gathered in order to justify a strike from happening, whether it be preemptive or retaliatory. Talking to Todd Huntley. Todd Huntley is now a professor at Georgetown University Law in Washington, D.C. He was what's known as a judge advocate inside of the Pentagon. Again, their job tasked to give legal counsel, give legal advice to members of the military about what is legal from a domestic standpoint and on an international scale. Laws that have largely been culminated and written since World War II. Todd is going to answer the likely planning that went into all of this, how long it may have lasted, what conversations are being had right now between who. Is the United States actually actively talking to Iranian leadership? What's left of it after the Ayatollah was killed and other top senior leadership were apparently taken out? What are the big unknowns that might really change this ball game? Number of variables that are out there. Todd talks a little bit about the chance, or at least his fear, rather, of terrorist cells acting out on their own in other countries in the region. Todd has some really timely insight into what we may be anticipating in the next 48, 72 hours, weeks, months, potentially. So let me jump into our conversation with Todd Huntley. He's got some really good advice. I think you're going to take away a lot of information that's not only going to put yourself at ease, but also be smarter about what's really happening right now. And you might be able to share some of this information with other people in order to go beyond the headlines. Again, we don't have talking heads. We just get to the root of the matter and find some answers. Let's do it. Let's talk with Todd. Todd, I first wanted to ask you a little bit about the lead up to these strikes. There was some reporting that United States intelligence got wind that the Ayatollah, other top leaders within the Iranian regime were going to be physically gathered together in one building. I imagine that even if that was the case, that the military didn't just say, okay, let's fire a couple of Tomahawk cruise missiles out there. There's a lot of work leading up to this and a lot of intelligence gathering too. So given your knowledge of the channels of conversation behind the scenes in the Middle East, based on your career and what you had been doing from a legal counsel standpoint within the Pentagon, what was likely going on before all this happened and how long?
Yeah, no, this is, I guess the result of months, if not years of work leading up to this. Again, some of what I have heard is that while the CIA had been tracking, Khomeini's location and some of the movements of the other senior leadership, that Israel and the Mossad actually had sources within, close to the leadership. And so it really was a joint operation between Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence. And it looked like, again, it was, I'm sure not just luck or happenstance, right? But the fact that they managed to get the word that a large group of Iranian senior leaders were going to meet, and that probably advanced the timeline of the attacks by hours, if not days.
So there really is a chance here that there are folks within the Iranian government, who are sources for American intelligence who likely tipped us off about this.
Yes, American and or Israeli.
So I'll ask you this too, based on what your conversations and what you might be able to share with anyone who still might be within the walls of the Pentagon. Is there any type of insight that you can share about what may have been learned or what may have been coordinated alongside Israel before all this happened?
I've been out of the Pentagon for a little while now. So I don't have any direct knowledge. Basically this is my opinion based on, my past experience and then just, things that I've read that So, the previous attacks on the Iranian nuclear facilities back, what was it, June or
I
something?
believe it was June of last year. Yes.
Yeah. Um, that had been done in coordination with Israel, but it was not so close. It wasn't like a joint operation, right? I mean, from what I understand, Israel went in, carried out several days of air attacks, and then the U.S. went in to carry out probably attacks on facilities that Israel just didn't have the capabilities of attacking or
Those bunker
capacity.
busters, I believe, is what we're
Exactly,
talking about.
exactly. Yep. This looks like it was a fully coordinated from the start joint operation. And so, US and Israel obviously have a lot of close military relations, but this I think is probably something that is at another level. Now, there are joint exercises conducted, there are meetings conducted, in the just in case the two forces had to operate together. But this is, I think, the closest they've operated together, at least as far as I know.
And back to your point too, that this might have been years worth of planning. This could go beyond just Donald. Well, arguably, it would go beyond Donald Trump's leadership too. Members of the military under Democratic administrations putting plans together in case someone gave the green light, right?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, I think this goes all the way back to probably 1980, and the planned operation to rescue the American hostages at the embassy in Tehran. And I think there's an argument to be made that the Iran and the U.S. have been in a armed conflict since 1979. There's a book called The Twilight War. I think the author is David Christ, and that's the point that he makes in his book. His father was I believe, a Marine general assigned at U.S. Central Command back in the 80s. And so, starting with the seizure of the U.S. embassy in Tehran, and then, all of the different Iranian attacks on U.S. forces in Iranian proxy attacks that we've been fighting each other since 1979.
Who ultimately would decide what type of attacks are deployed in this type of scenario? And does the president get to cherry pick certain types of attacks that are laid out?
Yeah, it depends on how involved the president wants to be. Ultimately, the president could select the targets, could select the aircraft or the different weapon systems being used. He's the commander in chief. That's within his authority. If you think back to Vietnam and Johnson supposedly directing military operations during Vietnam. But my guess is the president, and this is how I think it typically works, the president lays out his broad goals and objectives. He gives that to the Secretary of Defense, who then works with the senior military leadership, primarily in this case, U.S. Central Command leadership.
CENTCOM, as we've come to know it,
CENTCOM,
right?
exactly. And in coordination with General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they would put together a plan. They would determine what military forces are needed to successfully achieve that goal, the president's goal, and then probably present it to the president for approval unless the president has already delegated that down to the Secretary of Defense.
Let's talk about communication leading up to this, and I don't mean on a Signal group chat. I say that tongue in cheek, right? But what are those conversations like immediately leading up to a strike like this between the United States and Israel?
Yeah, you say that tongue in cheek, but I did read, I think this morning, that supposedly the president gave the go order on board Air Force One when Dennis Quaid was on there with him.
Okay, I have not come across that reporting, but the day is young.
So you were talking about communication between Israel and the United States.
Yes. What were those conversations like immediately before the launch was given?
Well, my guess is in the weeks leading up to this, obviously, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump probably had spoken on at least one occasion. But again, the United States has very close relationships with the Israeli military. The United States, I am sure, had U.S. military liaison officers at Israel at their military headquarters. Israel very likely had military liaisons in Tampa or at least in Qatar at Al Udeid Air Base, probably in Tampa, to help plan and coordinate this. And I'm positive there was a open line of communications as these, not only while they were being planned, but as they were being conducted.
Do you believe there are real, tangible conversations happening between whatever is left of the Iranian leadership right now and the American and Israeli government? Are they? Seems to be the president he's gone on a wave of phone calls with reporters. It seems in the last
Yeah.
couple of 48 hours, and it seems like he's changing his tune in some cases, depending on who he's talking to. But he had indicated, I'll backtrack, that the Iranian leadership, again, whatever's left of it, has apparently reached out. What kind of talks are being had right now with all these retaliatory strikes?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised if there's any coherent communications from Iranian leadership to the U.S. Again, I think he was the deputy foreign minister, perhaps given an interview, Iranian deputy foreign minister, that essentially said the military was on basically remote control, that they had been given broad authority to launch counterattacks in case communications and leadership were cut off. And I think that's what we're seeing. So
Hmm.
I suspect there aren't, certainly not high levels. And if they are taking place, right, for years, Switzerland had represented U.S. interest in Iran since we did not have diplomatic relationships. So
You're
if there are
talking
any
about back channels at this point.
exactly, probably back channel communications through diplomatic channels.
Is retaliation in moments like this always calculated, or is it mostly, I don't want to say emotional, but that's the word that's coming to mind right now?
Yeah, when you've taken out pretty much their entire top leadership, it could just be basically striking out with whatever they have. So not very calculated. Um, and I forget if it was in President Trump's first term, but certainly in past exchanges of fire between the US and Iran, Iranian responses have been, you know, limited and looked like they were designed to send a message to their domestic population, to, their domestic leadership that we struck back, but they really didn't do any damage. And so, it was kind of an attempt to de-escalate the situation.
How do leaders respond forcefully without accidentally starting something bigger?
That is the $64 million question, right? I mean, you can never be sure. You attempt, I think, probably to communicate through back channels, and ironically enough, right, this is where intelligence becomes very important. That, you want to have good intelligence sources inside the adversaries, basically inside their decision loop, right? So that you know what their intent is in the hope that you don't inadvertently escalate the situation. And so that is always, I hate to call it a dance, but that is always, right, the back and forth that is going on in these situations.
What are you watching right now? What are you looking for over the course of the next 72 hours that might give you an idea of where this may be heading?
Well, first off, and again, this is probably coming from personal interest. I'm keeping an eye out on Iranian attacks on not only U.S. personnel and facilities in the Middle East, but possible attacks on, what you might call soft targets, terrorist attacks conducted by Iranian Quds Force or Hezbollah or other proxies. And obviously, I'm concerned about that because the risk to Americans and um, that it poses. But also, I think if that happens, that's a clear sign that Iran's escalating, right? If they start attacking U.S. embassies or other sites in Europe or even in the United States, that's one thing I'm looking for. Another that I think would be the the reaction within the what's left of the Iranian leadership and also the Iranian military. Is there some elements of it that attempt to rise up and seize control, kind of supported by, those Iranian civilians who have been protesting for the last few weeks? So I think those are the two things that I'd really be looking for.
Let me backtrack to your first point, and it left me with this question because you had mentioned any type of terrorist cell attack from Hezbollah or otherwise, would, in your mind, be an active decision to escalate this. But if the United States is continuing to bombard, literally, Iran for the next couple of weeks, potentially up to 4 or more, as the president has indicated, is the U.S. by default choosing to escalate all of this? Or is this a point of privilege? Hey, we went in here with this mission. You are on our timeline at this point.
No, I think that's definitely the thinking probably within US leadership that, we control the momentum, we control the timing. Since you would not negotiate, to the things that we wanted you to agree to, we're just going to make sure that, we achieve those objectives using military force. And, you hate to say it, but even though this is perhaps the largest scale US air operation, certainly from since Iraq, you it's hard to say you would escalate somehow, but the US could always escalate if it wanted to. I hope it doesn't. I don't think there's a need to,
What
but
would that look like?
my guess is it would be full scale attacks against Iranian military and government facilities. Um, so far to
To get
date, it seems like they've
apparently,
been.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, it seems like while they're still pretty widespread, they're focused on specific things, at least as far as I understand. Um, so
Well, I saw from CENTCOM yesterday, they put out a list, bullet points, if you will, of some targets that had already been hit. They said they'd already gone after Iranian naval submarines and ships. So it seems like they're already hitting some hard infrastructure.
they are, but and I think it's been primarily Israel. I heard hitting I won't pronounce this correctly probably, but the Basij paramilitary force, the religious police, the morals police, if you will, that go around enforcing the hijab rules and whatever else, that supposedly Israel has started hitting those personnel and facilities. That's that's widening the scope.
Let me talk about artillery itself. Based on what we've already dropped, what we've already launched, separate from our defense systems, which, by the way, I'm very intrigued about this laser defense system, this laser dome that apparently is
Yeah.
being deployed right now. Separate from that, in any type of escalation, what kind of munitions might be used in an escalatory? Obviously, I mean, nobody wants a nuclear bomb dropped, right? And that would effectively, I'm not clearly a military intelligence analyst or officer, but it seems like that would be counterintuitive of any goals here. So, what kind of munitions might be used in any type of escalation?
I don't think it would be any different type of weapon systems, just the amount and where they're going to be used. Yeah, I don't think we run the risk of, nuclear escalation. Obviously, I think that's one reason why this was done now before Iran had a chance to
Mm.
develop their own nuclear weapon, because had they reached that point, we probably would not be seeing this level of force being used.
When do conflicts like this start to usually spiral?
I don't think you can say one way or the other, because when they start to spiral, it's because they've taken on a life of their own, right? Something
Mm.
has happened, I don't know, call it that black swan event. Something unexpected has happened. That's, I think, a lot of people's concern, and one of my concerns is that, has there been some idea of what success looks like laid out, by the president, by US
He
military
said that this
leadership?
is a full blown success right now. It says that the United States is ahead of schedule, in his words.
Yeah, I think also we heard back in June that we had obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Yes,
So,
we did hear that.
I think that obviously, if you don't have a kind of an idea of what victory looks like, it becomes very easy for things to take on a life of their own. And, I think we saw that certainly in Iraq after 2003, that we just kind of continued down this path, I think, without a real idea of where it might lead. And that's my concern here as well.
Let me get into a question that I asked you previously about those Venezuelan boat strikes where drugs were allegedly being
Yeah.
smuggled into the US. Was this legal to launch these strikes on Iran? Did Congress need to be consulted before this? Analysts saying that this was preemptive, right? Not reactionary. What
Right.
say you?
Right. And so, just like the Venezuela strikes, right? You kind of have to look at it both domestically and internationally. And so domestically, while I think it is, in my own personal opinion, that it is not in line with what our founders had intended when they drafted the Constitution. This is where we're at because of one, past presidential uses of force. The Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel refers to it as the historical gloss, that, the presidents have used force absent congressional authorization basically since the time of Thomas Jefferson and the Barbary Pirates. And the fact that Congress does nothing to step in and limit it or stop it basically just cedes the ground to the president domestically,
Hmm.
right? I mean, that power when it comes to the use of force, that constitutional authority, is one that has to be played out between Congress and the president. And Congress seems to have just stepped aside and given the president, not just this president, but in the past also, right? Kind of they haven't stepped in to limit the use of force. And obviously you might look to the third branch, the courts, to try to put everybody back in their constitutional box.
That takes a lot of time.
Well, and in this case, the court would not get involved because they would say it's a political question. This is one for Congress and the president to sort out. It's a tug of war between those two branches. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the Declare War Clause, and the president's Article 2, Commander-in-Chief authority. So that's
Well,
domestic.
okay.
Internationally, I think that it's not lawful as international law currently stands. And that is, right, typically we say there are two lawful authorities for a state to use force, for a country to use force. UN Security Council resolution, obviously that doesn't apply, right? Or self-defense in response to an armed attack or an imminent armed attack. So the question is, has the United States been attacked by Iran, or were they about to be attacked? And I think most people would say no, but I think there's an argument to be made that yes, in fact, this was a lawful use of force in self-defense, at least internationally.
How would you argue it?
That gets back to this theory that the United States and Iran have been fighting each other since 1979, right? And the problem is, and I think this is where we have international law as it's developed since post World War II, and kind of international threats and international security are sometimes in conflict with each other. And that is, Iran has been using force either directly or through firing of missiles against US military facilities in Israel and Israeli facilities, or through proxies, right? Arming, funding, training, directing attacks by Hezbollah, Hamas, Shia militias in Iraq while the U.S. had forces in Iraq, right? I mean, hundreds of U.S. military members have been killed, right? Going all the way back to 1983 in the bombing of the Beirut barracks, those Marines that were killed. And they've always kept it at a level, right, that was fairly low, comparatively speaking. And I think that's done intentionally, to try to avoid a large scale armed response like what we're seeing now. But if a state continues to be attacked like that, albeit at a very low level,
Mm-hmm.
and a state like Iran maintains not only the capability to continue those attacks, but the intent to do so, a state needs to defend itself.
Hmm. And potentially escalate their ability to attack.
Right. Right. And obviously any type of force used in defense in such a case has to be necessary and proportionate. So that would be the question, right? Is this really proportionate to the threat posed by those, relatively, minor, but long and ongoing attacks against US and US interest in facilities?
Other than missiles, other than bombs, what kind of tools does the United States and Israel have in their tool belt right now to further, their operation, to increase attacks that may not be sending plumes of smoke into the air? I understand that I saw some videos online, I believe they were validated, that Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump were able to get a message through onto television screens in Iran. I know that the internet is out. I don't know exactly if that was something deliberately done by the United States or an after effect of utilities going down because of the bombs. But what other tools do our forces have in our kit right now?
Right. No, I think you're right on that. That there have been cyber capabilities and space-based capabilities, whether those are cyber or something else that were used at least in the initial attacks, right? Because the whole idea is to try to take their air defense systems offline and to take some of their other weapon systems offline, so that the U.S. basically has a safer way into attack. And I think you're going to continue to see those used. Right now, what'll be interesting, and we may never know, we may not know until after this is over, right? But at least so far, it seems that those capabilities, particularly the cyber capabilities, have been used in support of more traditional military capabilities, like aircraft and missiles. But m- my guess is behind the scenes, cyber, kill, quote unquote, capabilities may also be used to, destroy certain Iranian systems. So that'll be interesting to see. And I'm sure that's probably also going on.
What are some of the largest unknowns variables you think that are out there right now?
Uh, So one is, again, I think what's the plan, right? What is the end state that's being envisioned and planned for? Because, you hope again that you have that end state and that what we're doing now is working towards that end state, right? So that's one thing. Another is just I think you mentioned it before, right? What variables enter into the equation? What else happens that nobody is thinking about? Um, what do the Iranian people do? Do we have elements of the Iranian military break away and support the civilian population and try to seize control to bring an end to all of this? And then what do those Iranian proxy groups start doing? I understand earlier today, Hezbollah launched some attacks from Lebanon into Israel,
I saw that, yes.
and Israel struck back. And that's what's interesting, is that the Lebanese government has, I guess, made a statement saying that the use of force in Lebanon is only to be done by the Lebanese military, and that they are going to take action to stop Hamas or Hezbollah from having a military capability. That is something the U.S. and other allies have been pushing for a long time. So that's something that would be interesting to keep an eye on.
Hmm.
And then I think also those proxies, other proxies around the world, right? Do they strike out? Do they carry out attacks? I don't know if you remember, but several years ago, there was an Iranian intelligence plot to blow up and kill the Saudi ambassador to the United States at a Georgetown restaurant.
Was it Cafe Milano?
I think so. Yep.
Okay. I do, if memory serves me right, I believe that was the restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, are there any, will anything like that happen? That's something else I think to keep an eye on.
How can Americans be healthy skeptics of information right now, and what to
Oof.
believe and what to, maybe not take to heart and accept as truth right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, I think yeah, if we had the answer to that, we wouldn't be talking to each other from our homes right now. We'd be right. I mean, that's to me one of the major problems we're facing as a country, as a society. I think one, be skeptical. Two, make sure you know who the sources are. Three, don't don't uh don't share information that is questionable, that you don't know, is, or that you maybe have doubts as to whether that's actually truthful information or good information. um and I think just those things that we should be doing with information in every day in our lives. It just becomes even more important now. And also I think hey, I'm not exactly a huge fan of the current administration, but I also think that we need to not make everything political. We tend to make everything political now, right? And that this you know to to look at things and try to set aside your political bias. or your personal bias if you have a personal bias against the president, which is very difficult to do. It's difficult for me. I think it's difficult for
It's
everybody.
emotional, right? It's hard
It,
to put that aside.
exactly. But especially when it comes to the US military. And again, on this matter, I am definitely biased, right? I you know, don't our military members don't make the decision to go to war to use force. Hopefully all of them are protected and come back and we have, few casualties, but I hope that the troops don't become part of the game or political pawns.
God bless the 4 service members that we know of who've already been killed. And President Trump had said, it raised my eyebrows, but he says that there's likely going to be more.
Yeah.
Let me close out with this, Todd, and it's kind of piggybacks on what we just discussed. How do we think we can best react to some of these headlines as fast as they're moving without overreacting?
One, I think, look at it in its whole, right? I mean, that's what I think right now. We don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, again, I look back at Iraq in 2003, and within a couple of months, we had President Bush on the deck of the aircraft carrier with the
Mission
mission
accomplished.
accomplished sign, right? And then 10 years later, we had left. Now we were going back because of ISIS. So anybody that says this is a total success, you shouldn't believe that, right? You need to wait and see what happens. This is something that's going to play out over the next weeks, months, hopefully not years. But so I think, one, keep that in mind. Don't jump to conclusions. Yeah. Again, I think if you're opposed to this, then make sure you go vote, because if Congress isn't going to step in and limit the president, if the courts won't step in, really the only check on a president's use of military force, if you don't agree with it, is to elect somebody else.
Power to the people in more ways than one. Todd, I appreciate your insight. It's really good to see you again.
Great to see you, Ben.
What are some of the biggest questions you have right now of what led up to America's strikes, Israel's strikes, and how we might act in the future, whether it be in the next hours, days, weeks, or maybe even further? I hope that Todd gave you some insight into the conversations that are happening right now behind the scenes, whether it be between different countries in order to get this resolved so that it doesn't get out of hand, but also what happened prior and what could be happening in the future. Your questions are so important to me. Please send them my way. I want to pass them on to the people who are in the know, who are not just shouting at each other. That's not the purpose of this. And I hope that we continue to have these types of insightful conversations to, again, go beyond the headlines and hopefully make folks more well-informed of information that they can trust. That's my goal. So with that, take care of yourselves and everybody else, and I will see you on the next episode. Take it easy.